Before the world knew their name, before the stages, the choreography, the stunning visuals, and the bars that had every reactor losing their minds, there was an idea. An idea that music didn't have to stay inside borders. That language didn't have to be a barrier. That a girl group can be built for just more than one country, but be built for the world. Imagine a girl group with no boundaries. Where Tokyo meets Seoul, where pop meets hip hop, where confidence and vulnerability, along with ambition, has no boundaries. Seven different girls. From different towns, different childhoods, different dreams, but the same goal and the same imagination and the same ambition to turn those imaginations into reality. And through those imaginations, they were drawn into a place to chase something bigger than themselves, a place designed to create something the industry had never seen before, a place where perfection is demanded, where pressure is constant, and only the extraordinary survive. What if global wasn't a concept, but a foundation? What if every lyric, every beat, every moment was crafted not just to entertain, but to redefine what a girl group could be? One man dared to ask that question. From that question came a blueprint, and from that blueprint came the answer. And that answer was XG.